Hey everyone, we're back again. So we're gonna pretty much be continuing from our previous stream, where we added the users in. Now we want to add in posts. So let's get started with that. Let's just share screen, and I'll just minimize this. So the first thing is, again, if you're new, we're gonna be using the JSON placeholder API. So you can just go to JSONPlaceholder.type code, and I'll add it in the description, so you don't really have to stress it. The endpoint that we're going to be using, as we said, is post. So we want to be able to get the post for each user. So before we show the that API, let's see if we can just run the simulator so you can see a visual of it. So instead of using the previews, I'm just going to click run so that we can see that. And just give that a sec to build. Xcode, it can take some time when it's ready. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. So this is our app that we built in our two previous streams before. And originally right here, we're using the Photos API to pretty much load this. And then in our last stream, we added a users tab. And in here, we're using our actual users API from JSON placeholder API. So what we want to do now is add another API, which is the post API. So we're going to be adding the post API inside this detail screen. So pretty much when you click on a user from the list, you're originally sent to their detail screen with their user information. But now we want to add a picker here, like different segments. And we're going to have a section for posts. And then we'll just call this an about section. So let's get this started. So let's pause this. Let's close this. And then we're going to jump back to JSON placeholder API to the website. And let's maximize this so we can see it better. Again, so we're going to be using this resource kind of. So let's look at what posts look like. So posts are pretty much a user ID, some title, and you see some information here. Okay, so we have a title and we have some body. So we have some title for the post, and then we have the body for the post, and then the ID that we're going to use to link to each user. But if we look at the endpoint right now, if we use it just like this, we're just going to get all posts. We don't want to do that. What we want to do instead is get the posts for each user. So if you look right here, you can see that you can watch the user ID as you see the first 2, 3, 4, 5. The first couple posts are all from user ID 1, which means that's the same person. If we scroll further down, you see that we have some user ID 2, so these are from a different person. So that's what we want. We want to show, if we jump back to our simulator, yeah, we want to show only the post for this guy, for nerd. So let's jump back again. I know we're bouncing around. And if we maximize this, and then we scroll down, we'll get some information on how we can get the posts for each user. So right now we're at roots and we see that, well, you can get the post, but that's not what we want. What we're going to do is actually click on guide there and then keep scrolling down. And what we're looking for is basically the endpoint that we can use to get the post for each user. And that's pretty much right here. So if we click on this, you can see that our endpoint is set up where it's like we could be users / the user ID / post. And for this, they're using 1. So you're going to see only the posts from user ID 1. So if we scroll down, you'll see only the posts from user ID 1. So now let's just copy this endpoint that we were using. And we're going to minimize this browser. And we're going to jump back to our app. So we want to introduce a new API. And we're going to use it inside our app. So let's jump over. So in our previous stream, we built this endpoints enum. And this is basically what we're using to handle the different endpoints that we might have. So right now we have to add a new endpoint. If this is new to you, just check out the previous stream and then just hop back right here. So we're going to add a new point on this. So we're going to say actually users, case user posts are actually posts by user. And remember, we need to add, let's just paste our endpoint here, and let's comment it out. So based on the URL, you see we need to add the user ID here. So we're going to add a string. We're going to make it that this case in our enum takes a string. And then we have to update our resource again. So resource is basically what we're using to show each endpoint. So I'll show more about that. So post by user. And then within here, this would be the user ID that gets passed in. And then the URL that we want to return for this, similar to what we have up there. We just come like this, comma, and paste that there. And right now we're only doing the post. Like if we should follow this URL, we'd only get the post for user ID 1. What instead we want to do is get the post for user ID, whatever ID that we pass in. So we're going to replace this with the user ID variable that we have up there. And just there's ID variable that we have up there. So now all we have to do is basically jump back to our services class that we have here. And again, we created this in the previous stream, but you can check that out. But I'll give a quick run through. So for our services class, we're using a protocol, which kind of describe how our services are set up. So we have a fetch pull photos and we have a fetch users function. And then we have some class API services input that actually conforms to this API service and allows it to implement each function, fetch photos, fetch users. And the reason we're doing it like this is to help with unit testing. So when we do it like this, we can basically create a mock API service so that we're not using real API calls in our unit tests. But let's come back here. So where we are now is we're going to have to add a new function that handles for getting the post based on the user ID. So we'll start by updating our protocol here. So fetch post by user ID. And we're going to make it that this also just takes in an endpoint. So that's the same type that we were working with earlier. So say endpoints. And it's also, we're going to be using Swift concurrency for both of these. So we have to do is async. And then we want to throw because we want to throw our errors. We want to show a specific type of error for that. And for this now, we actually need a new model to handle for each post. So for now, let's just, instead of returning anything, let's just pause there. And then our function is actually our class is actually going to complain to us that it wants this function. So let's just give it the basic setup for now. So we'll say fetch post by user ID, and it's empty. So we're going to come back here so we can add a to-do, add return type, and I guess logic. It's okay. So we have to create the same way how in our previous functions, we were returning some type of model, whether it be user model or photo model. We now have to create a new model that represents each post. So we have our models folder that we made previously. And you see that we have all the models that we're using: photo model, user model with a couple other nested models. All these are pretty much nested just for user. But now we're going to add a new type. And we're going to call this struct, and we're going to call this post. And what we know from previously is that we have to make these structs decodable so that when we get the data from the API, we can actually decode them into models that we want to use. So now we need to find out what on the post API do we want to use to create this model. So we will go back to our pretty much API, and we're going to copy what it looks like, just so I don't have to go back and forth each time. We're going to paste this here, and now we're going to comment it. So the first parameter that we see in here is the property is that it is user ID. So we'll say let user ID, and that's an integer. Then we'll say let ID, which is also an integer. And then we'll say let title, which is now a string. And then we have a body, so it's let body, which is also a string. Okay. So now we can actually remove this comment since our model now matches it. And we're going to jump back to our services class. and we're going to update pretty much our function that we have, our function signature that we have here. So now we have a type that we want to return. So we'll say use arrows, and then we'll add it return an array of posts. And now we have to slide down to the implementation, and we'll return again an array of posts. So what we can do now is I'll go through the exact process as we did before, just so for anyone that's new. So the first thing we have to do is convert or get the endpoint that we want to use and convert it to a URL. So to do that, we can say guard let URL equal URL, and let's have it use a string property. And from our endpoint, we will call resource, which is a string. And just as a reminder, resource is basically calling, say, resource that posts. If we did post.userid, we'll be getting this endpoint. If we did users, we'd be getting this endpoint, and then photos, the same procedure. Okay, so now we are returning in this case. So we'd say endpoint, whatever the resource is, and we'll say else. And then for this case, we want to throw our errors. That's why we have this throws parameter here. Throws keyword here. So now we'll say API service error. And then for this, we'll throw a invalid URL, since that's basically the issue we're having here. Now we're going to keep seeing this issue that says missing return instance method expected to return post. And that's because we told the function that we're going to return a post. But that's going to be annoying seeing it each time. So now let's just return an empty array just to pause that error for a second. All right. So now that we have the URL, this is where we're actually going to start making our API requests. So we'll say let with Swift data with Swift concurrencies like let response, and then we'll say equal URL session dot shared dot data task, and make sure you look for the async one that just takes a URL, not a URL request. And then we'll just pass in our URL here. So we're gonna get a couple errors here. One, this can fail, and that's why we have to mark it with a try. Also, any procedure that are usually functions that can fail or throw an error, we want to basically put them inside a do catch block just so we can catch that error. So we're going to cut this for a second. I'm going to say do pasting this, and then we'll say catch. And for now, let's just print the error. I'm going to say error. And we can remove this return type from here and just place it here. Otherwise, we're going to keep seeing that error. I will say try. And then we have to also mark it with an await, since this is an asynchronous function. Oh yeah, it is going to still ask me for this because I'm not throwing. So instead of printing here, let's just throw the error that we want. So in our previous function, you can see that pretty much we're taking in a custom error. And that's basically the error that we receive from the API, from the system. Only thing is that we have a readable message that's linked to it. So this is our custom error, and an error message is a variable inside of this enum. And then for custom, what we do is we return, if we want a readable error message, we return a string that starts with something went wrong, and then followed by whatever the error the system gives us. So we're going to do something similar to that in this case. So API service error dot custom. And then we'll say error dot localize description. Okay, so now this should be fine. We won't get any warnings issues right now or any errors. So the first thing we have to do again is check the response. So we need to check the response to make sure it's a valid response. So we'll say guard let response HTTP URL response. URL response. I will set it equal to response as HTTP URL response. HTTP URL response. That, and then now that we have the HTTP URL response, we can get access to the status code. So we want to make sure that the status code is between 200 and 299. So we can do that by adding this, and then we'll check if it contains HTTP URL response that status code. So then we know that it's a valid status code if it's between 200 and 299. Otherwise, if not, we're going to throw error. And the error we're going to throw is one that we created already from the previous streams. And we'll say API service error and just say invalid response. So now we have checked the response, so we know that it's a good response, or if it's not, then we're going to throw error. But now we can start working with the data. So we'll say let post equal JSON decoder. So we have to decode that data, JSON decoder dot decode. And we're going to decode it as an array of posts, which is pretty much what our function is asking for, what we want. And then what we're going to decode is the data. So you're going to get a couple errors here. So the first thing is that you must mark it with a try, since JSON decoder can fail for this. And it looks like we already added post as a ident. Oh, so we're eventually going to get an issue here, but I'm going to wait until we start using it so you can see for yourself. So for right now, we have gotten post. So let's, instead of returning an empty array, let's just return post. Nice. Okay. Now what we want to do is jump back to our content view. And basically, again, let's run the API. Let's run the project. Okay. And when we run the project, you see, we go to the users list screen. We can see all the users. And when we click on them, as we said, we want two more sections. So we want a section called about and a section called post. So basically where we're going to need this API call is inside our user detail view. So that's pretty much this right here. Again, if you want to take a pause and jump back to the previous stream, that's fine, just to refresh your memory. So let's zoom in a bit, and then we're gonna, so inside our user detail view now, before we add in the picker to actually allow us to toggle, let's first check to see if our API is even working. So let's jump back to user detail view model, and then we're going to say func, and then we're going to say fetch. So we are going to say fetch post. So we want to fetch post, but if you notice, this detail view model only has access to the model of like whatever user we clicked on. So we actually need to give them access to our API service. So if we jump over to our user list view model, which is the main view, which is pretty much the view model for this screen right here, to list all of these that uses the API to get this, you'll see that this user list view model has access to a property called services, and that API services is our service that we use. Okay, well, it's a protocol here, but you can see that we added a default value that conforms to it. So yeah, so what we need to do is actually pass this services that we have inside our user list view model and pass it down to its child user detail view model. So to do that, let's jump back to user detail view model, and let's add another parameter, another property called service, and call services. And then we'll say serve API services, and then we will make it that the initializer requires another service. I'm not going to give this a default value because I don't want us creating, I don't want the user detail view model having its own initialized service. I want it to only use a service that we pass down from user list view model. So I'll say self.services. I will say services. And now if we run this, we're going to get some errors because we haven't actually passed services from list view model yet. This is from the preview. So let's just add some in here. Yeah, whatever. Did I add an extra one? No. All right. So let's maximize this again. And then if we go to where we're using user detail view. Oh, I'm actually inside user detail view. I need to go to user list view. And you see, this is where we're using user detail view, like we're navigating to it. So we're using a navigation link wrapped around our user row view, which is pretty much each row in the list. And then we're telling it where we want to go, which is the user detail view. So since we updated that it needs the view model for user detail view needs a service, we have to add that. But we're not going to initialize it since the view model already has it, the user list view model. So we'll say view model dot services and just pass in that same instance. So we're not taking up extra memory and just wasting space. So now, if we run this will act the same. We haven't really added any changes, but we just want to make sure that that dependency was passed on properly. All right. Okay. You go to users, you can scroll. Everything is working as expected. Cool. So let's just close that, and then we're going to maximize this. And now the next thing we're going to check is we want to check to see if we can actually get if our post API that we added is actually working. So let's jump to fetch post, and then we're going to say we're going to use our services. So let's say services dot fetch post by user ID. And you're gonna see this error pop up, but let's fix that in a second. Let's fill out what we would need for the endpoint. So that's gonna be posts. We're gonna use from the enum. We're gonna be post.by user. And now we're gonna pass in the user ID for this user, which we know is stored inside this user that was passed to the detail view model from whichever user, so this same user that was passed in, and is with this user is going to be whatever user was selected, whichever row was selected. So we know the user ID will be correct. So we'll say user dot ID. And then we still are going to have an error. So there are a couple of things I was complaining about here. Oh, user ID is actually an integer for some reason. I don't know why they did it like that. So let's say string. Let's just wrap this in a string and then just paste that back. Okay, so we see a couple errors here. So it's saying async call in a function that does not support concurrency. So the fetch post by user ID, we know it's an asynchronous function based on it having this keyword marked here after its function signature. So to handle this, what we're going to do is update our fetch post to have async. And we still have an issue because this call again can fail. It can throw an error. So remember, if we want to handle cases where a function or a process could throw an error, best to wrap it in a do catch. And we'll say do catch. And for now, let's just print error. And then let's just add back this API call. And we're going to add what it needs. So it returns, remember, this return our posts. And so we're saying we're calling the API and we're returning an array of posts inside this variable. But we still see an error. And the first thing is because, again, this is a throwing function. So we have to mark it with try. And it's also an asynchronous function. So we also have to mark it with await. So the error goes away. So now let's just print, or better yet, let's dump. That way, and the reason we're using dump instead of print is because dump provides the printout to the console much more readable. So what we want to do now is see what these values are. Are we hitting the catch block? Are we able to decode it and print? So we want to call this function. So how would we call this function? Basically, what we have to do is go to user detail view, which is basically the screen. And then what we're going to do is whenever this screen appears, for now, we're just going to fire that API call. So we'll say task. And I'll say await view model.fetch post. Fetch post. Cool. So now, whenever the user detail view screen is shown, this function is going to get called, and we're going to fetch post based on the user. So let's run. Okay, And we are at the user screen, on the photo screen. So let's just click over to users. And now when we click to go to the detail view, you'll see that our breakpoint does get hit. And we are, so if the fact that we make it to this point is pretty good. That means that one, we didn't hit an error. And another reason how you can know is that if we look inside our block here, we'll see all the variables that are within scope. And you see our post variable has 10 elements in it. We can see that it's pretty much decoded. But let's see how print shows it. So let's say next. And if we scroll up, you'll see print presents it in like a much more easier to read format. You can easily see what each property value is. And this pretty much means that the data was decoded properly. So let's get rid of these breakpoints. We're going to stop. Get rid of this. Okay. And now what we want to do is actually show these posts inside our user detail view. So to do that, let's maximize again. And we're going to jump over to our user detail view. And let's minimize that. And then, like we mentioned before, what we want to do is basically have it that have a picker that allows the user to toggle between seeing their about section, which is pretty much this form view here. And we want to toggle it between seeing about section and their posts, all their posts, so like their post section. So what we can do now is add a picker up here first. So let's start by adding the picker. And let's turn on this right here. Turn on our previews. Okay, cool. So basically what we want to do is add the picker right below email. All right, so maybe we can get rid of spacer. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, we don't need spacer right here. All right, so let's get rid of this. And for pickers, one thing that we're gonna need though is a enum. And this enum is gonna be like what we use to keep track of what option in the picker is selected. So let's say, let's click this one first. And let's just give it a localized string key of pro detail screen section. Right? And you see that it requires two parameters right now. So it requires a selection and a selection that's binding, and it requires some type of content. So to fix this, we need to create a enum for this. So we'll jump over to our detail view model. And what we could do now is create a quick enum. Let's just create it out here. So we'll say enum. I'm gonna call this detail section view. Detail sections. User detail section. Yeah, let's put a user. So user detail sections. And in the first case, as you mentioned, let's just make that post. And then let me the second case be our about section. Cool. Nice. So if we jump over back, if we jump back over here, we see that we need to add a binding. And we want to bind, we want to have a property in our view model bind to our new enum. So we can keep track of whatever is selected. So we'll add a new publish variable here. And we're going to call this add publish var, and we're going to make it call it user detail sections. And this is going to actually be the type of the enum that we just created. We're going to set the default value to just be post. So what we want to do then is that based on this property, whenever it gets changed from post to about, the toggle shifts. But we're setting it initially to post because we want that to be the first screen. All right, nice. So we jump back to our picker. And what we're going to do now is say use a binding version of that publish variable from our view model. So $ view model the user detail sections, and then we'll say enter for content. And what we're going to do now, so this selection is we'll be able to see what picker option is selected. So it's a selection. So now inside here, let's use a for each. And we're going to use a for each based on the options that we have for our enum. So we'll say user detail section. And what we want is to be able to say, for every case that's inside our user detail section, create a different option in our picker. So what I want to do is be able to say all cases, but to get that, we have to update our enum. So let's just comment this out for 1 second. And we're going to jump back to our enum, our view model, which has our enum. And we have to add an additional parameter called case iterable. And this is going to make us that we can iterate over all the cases in our enum. And that will be really good inside a for loop. So let's get rid of that, uncomment that, and we'll say user detail sections. And you see now we have a third option called all cases. And it says a collection of all values of this type. And now we'll say this. And now this will return each section, and let's say in. Now let's just put some text here. So we're going to put basically what we want the label to be for each option in the picker. So we'll say section, and we want it to be a title. We want it to be basically a title. So how we could do this is, and rely on just the enum to do this, we could probably say something like this, and this would kind of work, but not how we want it. Referencing initializer, identifiable. Oh yeah, we have to make user detail sections conform to identifiable. So let's just add that in real quick. So to do that, so basically with SwiftUI, when you're iterating over a collection of data, whether it be an array or however, in this case, a case iterable, we have to make that type conform to identifiable. And then one of the requirements for identifiable is that we have to have a property called ID. So let's make this for UUID, and let's do return UUID of some type. Cool. All right, and the reason I didn't do var ID equal UUID is because inside of enum, you can't have stored properties. So created a computed one instead. All right, so now let's jump back to over here, and you'll see that we don't see that error anymore because we added identifiable. But in our picker, we do see each section, but the section has the same name. Also, we don't want this to be our picker. We want the segment picker. So to get that, just like on list, so you can just be .list style, you can do the same thing with pickers. You can just say .picker style. And then for this one, we're going to say segmented. And you're going to see change automatically to that. But we're still seeing the same section for each. What we want to do instead is let's add some padding to it. I don't like how it's actually right exactly to the corner. So let's just add some quick padding. So we'll say that horizontal. I know that looks a bit better. So as I said, we want the title to be based on whatever section we are in. So if we click on user detail section and say we could add another property, and let's call this title, and let's make this a string, and this is going to be based on whatever case is selected. So let's switch on self, and then let's say in the case where it's a post, for the post section on the segment picker, we want it to be a post. We want it to say post. And then for the return section, we want it to say about. About. Cool. So now what's going to happen is what we can do now is say on this enum, on this case that is pretty much each case inside our enum, we can just say section and then say title. And you'll notice that the update happens here where we see the respective title for each case. The issue though still is that for each case, for the segment, we're not able to select any of them. We're not able to toggle, and none of them look like they're ever selected. To fix this last problem, what we have to do is add a tag to our text. So I say tag, and for this, we'll just say section. And now you'll notice that we can see which one is selected. We can also toggle them. Nice. All right, so that's the first portion now. What we want to do though is make it that whenever we select the post section, we see the post, all the users' posts below here. If we select the about section, we see the about section, which is right here. Nice. So before we start adding in that detail, let's jump here real quick. And then inside our view model, we see that the enum has taken up so much space. So best to just move this to a different file. So let's go to our folders, and then inside user detail, let's add another folder. Let's just call this user detail sections. And let's make a new Swift file. I'll just call this user detail sections. And I'll just say plus enums. I like to do this. You don't have to do this part. Do the plus enums part. And then what I'm going to do is just paste the exact enum that we had. Now, if we jump back over to user view model, everything should be working as expected, and we are back to having a ton of space. Cool, cool, cool. We are going to get back to adding in the posts, so don't worry. So before we do that, though, let's jump back to user detail view. And the next thing that we have to do is prepare a space that we're going to actually put all our posts. So to do that, we want to make it that whenever the section changes, that we show the respective post. All right. So the first thing you might be thinking is, all right, just wrap this inside a if view model.sections is equal to about, then show this, otherwise show the other screen. So to make this, do this a bit cleaner, what we can do is create our own custom view for the about section. So let's just cut this entire thing. And then what we're going to do is create a new file. Let's just say a new file template, and we're going to make it a SwiftUI file. And then we're going to call this about form view. Yeah, I feel like that's fine. And then replace whatever we have in here with what we had before. Cool. And then let's just have this accept a view model, since that's what we're kind of using here. And it's the type of the user detail view model. But because we want to listen for changes that happen, or you want to be able to respond to them, we also have to add a property wrapper here. And for this one, you might be thinking, oh, he's going to make it a state object, but no, I'm going to actually do an observed object. And the reason for this is because this view model will be an external view model created. It's more so a child view model. And usually when you're using a view model inside a child view, you want to use observed object instead of state object. So now that we have that, our preview is going to complain. Let's just fix this real quick. It requires a huge users model though. So I'm probably just going to grab it to the one that we have in our user detail view. Let's just roll here. And let's grab this. So Command C. And then we're just going to paste that one right here. Just to prepare that for the preview. It might look a bit different here because of spacing and padding and so forth. Let's give it some time. It's loading. Okay, so it looks pretty much the same. All right, so now let's jump back over to our user detail view. And the part that we removed, or form section, or about form section, you see how it just kind of sets to the bottom. What you want to do is add that back. But basically what we were going to do instead is switch. We're going to say switch.view model.sections. User detail sections. And now based on whatever section that's selected, we want to show a different view. So we already have the form view, about form view. And let's just pass in our view model in there. Nice. And now we need to create a view now for our post. But let's just add some text in here and just test. Okay, excuse me. And then, so if we toggle, we can see that the views are pretty much changing. But this isn't the view that we want for posts. So let's build out the post view. So what we can do here is say vstack, And when we say VStack, we can start by basically creating. So we want to basically have a list of every post. So let's create a list. And let's do it like this just to see what it's going to look like. So a basic list first with some text. Okay, cool. So we don't have to. So in a previous post, I'm not going to really start from scratch here because we kind of did this detail in a previous our flow in like our previous streams. So what we know is that instead of doing it like this, we can go back to our user detail view model, and what we want to do is actually use our post that we got here from the API. So to do that, what we want to make is another property called, I'll make it a publish property, and it's going to be of the type, it's going to be, let's just call it post, and it's going to be of the type an array of posts. And this is where we're actually going to store the data when we get it from the API. And because it's published, whenever we get that data, the view will automatically re-render to show it. So instead of creating a new post variable, let's just assign it to the one we have. And one thing, I won't spoil that one for you. So let's just go. So we have the post here. And what we want to do is jump back to our user detail view. And then instead of using just a list, let's do the view model, that post. And then that will give us a post for each post in there. And then within each row inside this post, what we want to do is, so let's look at, oh yeah, it finally gave us it. Okay, so before we do that, let's add some basic text first. And you're going to see this error come up. It says, initialize whatever requires a post conform to identifiable. So all this is saying that pretty much like we did for the detail section, our whatever model is being used in a collection here in SwiftUI needs to conform to the observable protocol. Not observable, the identifiable protocol. So all we have to do is jump back to our model, which is the post. So we just go into the models folder and then comma and then do identifiable. And usually we would have to add an ID parameter here, but post already required it. So we're just going to use it. Okay. All right, so post already required it. So now if we go back, after adding that, adding the identifiable protocol, you see that error disappears. Nice, but we're seeing the same thing and we don't want that. But we are seeing the correct amount of posts since the post array was updated. So now let's add like a better view. Say like a VStack. And then inside of VStack, so there are two things. So there's a title for each post, and then there's a body. So let's say text, and then post.title. And then the next one below this will just be text post.body. And then you'll notice that we have a thing where it's like, most of this seem like it's kind of in the center. It looks a bit jumbled. So the first thing we can do to fix this is say task, add an alignment. So we say alignment dot leading. And you see how everything pretty much shifts to the side. But it's kind of hard to tell the title from the rest of the data. So let's increase the font of the title. We can just literally make it let's make it a title 2. Okay, title 2 is probably too big. So let's make it a title 3 and let's add some bolding. Let's say, oh, we could literally just say bold. Nice. Okay. All right, so now for the body, well, it's a bit still a bit harder. So let's add some padding to the bottom too. And we don't need 10. I think that's the default. We just need probably like 5. Okay, so it's a bit easier to tell it now. and you see the body right below it. So you see the post title, and then you see whatever the body is right below it. Nice. All right, so what we're doing now, so we're able to call the API, get this data, and decode it to a post model. So this looks okay so far, but what I want to do is basically, I don't want to just have this vstat just here. I want to do something similar like what we did for about form view. So let's cut this, and we're going to create our own separate view for this. So let's call this, actually, let's move about form view under this. And then inside here, let's create a new SwiftUI file. And then we'll call this post view. This is called this post view. And then let's replace whatever we have in there with this. And we're going to get some errors here, only because it doesn't know what in view model is. So we're going to do the same thing that we did for the about section. We're going to add an observed object. I'm going to say var view model, and I say user detail view model. And now that should go away, but we actually have to update the preview again. Now, if you want, you can really just ignore this if you don't really care about the previews, but we are going to do it. So impl, and let's do this. And now for the user model, let's just grab the same one that we use in the about section. Okay. Okay, let's go back, and let's just plop this right here. So now we don't have to worry about the previews. All right, so now let's back to the more fun stuff. So for post view, we're gonna copy that, and then jump back over to user detail view, doing a paste there for post view, and it requires a view model. So we're gonna pass in that view model. Nice. And now we won't see any error. So let's see how the actual UI for this looks. So instead of using the preview, let's just run this. Nice. So let's go over to users. Then we click on users here, and a couple things are here. So one, we do see the post, and we're able to toggle it, switching to different sections. Fine. But so we can stop that right now. But we see this error here that it mentions publishing changes from background thread is not allowed. Make sure to publish values from the main thread. So if we jump to our user detail view model, let's just minimize this. We see the purple error here specifying which line is the issue. If you missed that console error and you didn't come back to this file, another heads up is this warning here. And if you click it, it pretty much is just going to push you to wherever the error is. Now, the reason we're having this is because, one, this is an asynchronous function. We're getting the data asynchronously, but we are using posts inside our SwiftUI view, which is pretty much always run on the main thread. So any UI changes that you want to make should always be run on the main thread. And because this isn't being done on the main thread, we're getting this warning. A quick fix for this is to add a main actor decorator on top of the function, and that will resolve it, making sure that it updates on the main thread. So if we run this again, we won't see this error in the screen. Good. And then we'll go to users. We will toggle a bit, scroll up a bit just to make sure it's not happening. And yeah, we don't see it. So let's just close that, stop that, and then like reopen, maximize, sorry. And now what we want to do is handle for, so a couple things. So we want to be able to show a loading spinner, and we want to also be able to show some type of error alert if an issue should happen. Honestly, we might not need to show error alert for this only because it's going to be a list inside of the view. So I guess what could be even more beneficial is to show an empty state if there are no posts. So we'll leave this for now, print error. And if you really want to implement this, you can pretty much do what we did in our previous streams, where basically I showed an error alert, a UI alert using SwiftUI by using a binding link to is presented and linking the error message showed, using the error message that we received from the error, showing that inside our alert. I'll leave that for you for a little bit of homework. So instead, what we're going to do is, if post is empty, what we want to do is show a content unavailable view. And this is just going to let the user know that they have no posts and like just to give them an update. So if you go back inside here, we'll go to users. Basically what I'm saying is, what if we come to this screen and then the post array is empty? What should we show? So let's give an example of this. So we'll say so instead of calling the API, we just won't call the API here. And then we'll run. And you're going to see why this is going to be really beneficial. Click this, and then in post, you see it's just an empty blank screen. There's no update on like what might be the issue, nothing. But in about, we see like some type of detail. And this is pretty much always be there because that's the user information. But for post, it's just an empty screen. So how we can fix this is adding a content unavailable view, just to let the user know that, well, there are no posts here and what some action that they might need to take. So we're going to leave this empty for a second, just so we can update this. So let's minimize that and maximize the view itself, the Xcode itself. And now what we're going to do is we're going to, inside our post case, post view, we're going to say if, so if view model that post is empty, or better let's say if it's not empty, I need to make an extension called not empty. So I'll just put that up. Anyways, and then let's copy this or cut this, paste it here. And then in the case where it is empty, we want to show a content unavailable view. We're going to add we're going to use the one that has a title, a system image, and a description. Now for the title, we're going to say no post available. No post available. And then for this, we could just add like a magnifying glass so that it seems like, we're searching for the post and we can't find them. Magnifying glass. And then for the description, let's just add, say, no post found. Please recheck your internet connection and retry. So now, if we run this, we're going to see this view now in the empty space that kind of gives us a description on what might be happening. All right, so we go to there and now we see this view. So this is, I'm sure you've seen this view before, maybe in the App Store or somewhere, multiple different apps. But we get this right out of the box by just using content unavailable view. So now if the user doesn't have any posts, at least they see this and they have some idea. Maybe they need to add posts. Maybe they need to check their internet connection, something. So now that we know that's working, let's re-add our API task and let's rerun this just to make sure everything is working. Nice. And go back here. And yeah, sure enough, we can still see all the posts for that user. And we can go over to the about section if we really wanted. Nice. All right. So nice. So that worked out pretty good. So we have pretty much finished up our user detail view, added 2 sections that we can use to show both post and the user about detail. If we want to, we could, oh yeah, I want you to add in handle for this error here. And just to give an idea of how we could do that, I'll give you a little hint. I'll jump over to here, and then inside our fetch users function, or you could just watch a previous stream. You can see that in the catch block, we're casting our error to the API service error, which is our pretty much custom error. And this our custom error has a readable, relatable error message. Are pretty much setting it to error message here. Let me just show you what this looks like. So this is our error case, our error enum, and we have 3 different cases, and then we have a property called in error message, and then for each, depending on each case, we have a different readable error message that can appear. So basically, we're setting that error message to our error message on our property in the view model. And then we have another property called show error alert that toggles. And basically, this is the Boolean that determines whether the alert is shown or not. Now, inside the user list view, I'll show you what we're doing. So we have an alert modifier, and we're using that alert that is presented. And that same show error alert, we're using it as a binding here. And then for the alert that we actually show, we're using in the text, the text that appears. In text, we're using view model, the error message, which will be the same readable error message from our custom error. So that works nice. Okay. All right, so let's jump back to user list view model. And we can jump back to user detail view. Let's scroll down. And this is looking pretty good. Nice. All right, so what we can do now is I'll leave this one to you. I'm very tempted to do this. So I'll say to do. You should handle your errors, and you can use previous streams to help. Nice. So do it. When you get some time, just do it for the fun of it. Now, what we can do now is we can actually try to test this user detail view model by creating unit tests for it. So to do that, should I save that for the next stream, or should I do this in this stream? Actually, I'm gonna save that for the next stream. And again, if you want to go ahead and use my previous streams, within each of the 2 previous streams, we did write unit tests. So you can pretty much follow that similar logic to write your own unit tests. Or if you want to challenge yourself, you could try using Swift testing, since we're using Swift concurrency for creating these APIs. So again, let's just do our quick run through our app. We have a photo section that uses the Photos API. We had a users tab that used the users API. And the about section still uses the users API. We're just passing data over there. But the post section, we actually are using a separate API. So far right now, we're using 3 APIs all inside our app. So the next thing we're going to do in the next stream is whenever the user clicks on any of these posts, we want to show them the comments that are right under it. And we'll be able to use that by adding another API endpoint from JSONPlaceholder API. So if you like the stream, just comment, like, and leave give an idea of anything that you want, any API you want us to be working on, or any type of library or framework from iOS, SwiftUI that you want to see me mess with. All right, so yeah, again, thank you for joining, and I hope you enjoyed the stream. Have a good day. Let me just end this. Nice.